When the president took a fresh victory lap this afternoon for his summit with Kim Jong-un, he might have spoken too soon. The breaking news, new reporting in the Washington Post. Here's the lead. Quote, U.S. spy agencies are seeing signs that North Korea is constructing new missiles at a factory that produced the country's first intercontinental ballistic missiles capable of reaching the United States, according to officials familiar with the intelligence. Joining us now by phone, one of the reporters on the byline, Joby Warrick. So, Joby, these new missiles North Korea is building, what do you know about them? What can you say about them?
Well, one thing that's become clear to us, Anderson, over the last few months is that our insight into what's going on in North Korea is getting much better. North Korea was always kind of a black box for intelligence. Now we have a really good picture of what's going on inside some of these facilities and decision-making by some of the leaders. And what we see here is weapons that are being constructed at a factory that made some of the most powerful weapons in North Korea's arsenal. And so at a minimum, we can say that North Korea has not put on the brakes as far as its weapons program is concerned.
What kind of evidence has the U.S. intelligence gathered to show that this is happening? Is it known?
Yes, we do know that there's some of this is photographs are being taken by the NGA, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, which looks not just at what we can see on the ground, but also has ability to penetrate inside buildings and see what's going on inside. And what we see is construction is continuing. They have hundreds of facilities around the country that make weapons, and surprised they haven't stopped work at many of these facilities. In fact, most of them are continuing to work.
So have the North Koreans made any kind of real moves at all to start a disarmament process?
There's only been a couple, and they're not that impressive, to be honest. The one that everyone's talking about is dismantlement of an engine test stand. That's where you take a rocket before you test it on an actual missile, and you just check its capacities and make sure it's working okay. They're taking apart one of those, but they already have proven that they have an engine that works. They don't really need this facility anymore. They can rebuild it fairly quickly if they want to, so it's more of a symbolic move than anything else. But the Secretary of State Pompeo just acknowledged this past week that fissile material, the stuff that makes nuclear weapons explode, that work continues. They're still making more of it, and now we have indication that the missiles are still being made too.
I mean, in fact, your reporting says that North Korean officials have been discussing how to deceive Washington about their nuclear capabilities. That sounds very alarming.
It is alarming, and the people that are listening to these conversations or catching these conversations in real time are very worried about it, because what we see is in real time evidence that North Korean officials don't really take this very seriously. They want to offer some token gestures to dismantling their nuclear arsenal, perhaps giving up some weapons, allowing inspectors to see some facilities, but they have no intentions of giving up everything. And that comes as no surprise when you think of nuclear weapons as being essential, at least in the eyes of the regime, to the survival of Kim Jong-un and his family.
Right. I mean, it certainly flies in the face of what the president, tweeted out when he came back about there's no more nuclear threat from North Korea. I mean, you report that North Korea's stockpile of enriched uranium could be substantially higher than we think. Is that right? And
this is really important as well, Anderson, because we've always known about one facility. We've been able to actually go inside of it. American scientists visited this place called Yongbyon a few years ago. But we had suspicions at the time there were other sites, and now we know of at least one other one. It's a big one. It's been working for at least 10 years, and that means that the stockpile of enriched uranium is probably much bigger than we knew even a few months ago.
It's incredible reporting. Joby Warrick, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Also, I want to urge everybody. Joby wrote a book that I read a couple years ago that I just think is one of the really best books I've ever read, certainly about ISIS. It's called Black Flags. It's all about the rise of ISIS, the history of Al-Qaeda. It's really an extraordinary book. I recommend everyone get it. Far back to North Korea, the new developments, jobs that Joby is reporting on do not necessarily come as a surprise to people who know the country and its behavior over the years. It might, however, come as a surprise to the president, who's gone out of his way to praise Mr. Kim.
He's got a great personality.
He is very talented.
Great personality and very smart. Good combination.
He's a, funny guy.
I learned he's a very talented man.
He loves his people. He loves his country.
He was really very gracious.
He's a very smart guy.
We've had a really great term together, a great relationship.
He's a great negotiator.
I think that he really wants to do a great job for North Korea.
He wants to do what's right.
He trusts me, I believe, I really do.
We got along right from the beginning. I think he liked me and I liked him.
Negotiating on behalf of his people. A very worthy, very smart negotiator, absolutely. And we had a terrific day.
So, is the president reassessing his views? No sign of it so far. Still plenty to talk about. Joining us now is CNN Global Affairs analyst Max Boot and CNN military analyst, retired Army Lieutenant General Mark Hertling. I mean, should, Max, this come as any surprise to anybody who has, followed the history of North Korea and the United States and efforts at peace between the two countries?
I think it's entirely expected to everyone, Anderson, other than Donald Trump himself. I mean, I think he's about the only person in the world, and probably the only person in his own administration, who actually thinks that as a result of the Singapore summit, the North Koreans were truly planning to give up their nuclear weapons, which they did not commit to. All they said was, we will work towards the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, which means something very different for Kim Jong-un than it means for Donald Trump. But Donald Trump has been trying to convince the world that this was a stupendous deal. The problem is solved. There's no more nuclear threat. And the intelligence consistently contradicts those rosy assessments.
General, I mean, the reality is North Koreans, as Max said, they've agreed to nothing as far as we know. So the fact they're continuing to build these missiles, it's not even necessarily like they're breaking some agreement with the U.S., because there's nothing really specifically written down.
They're not, Anderson, and Max and I are on the same page. We're talking about a dynasty, the Kim dynasty, that has been in place for 3 generations. Grandfather, father, and now Kim Jong-un. You're not going to change their strategic approach in a morning session at a summit in Singapore. All of us who have been skeptical about this from the very beginning, and anyone who has served on the Korean Peninsula knows that this just isn't the way it works in the real world when you're dealing with Kim Jong-un. He is not a good guy. He is not a charismatic leader. He is a vicious dictator who kills his own people. And he depends on these nuclear weapons, as he's been building them for the last several years, to give him power and to give him strength and to have other people fear him. Yeah, this is not a surprise at all to anyone that knows this regime.
Max, the Post quoted a non-proliferation expert, and I want to make sure I get it right. He says that the U.S. has this backwards. North Korea is not negotiating to give up their weapons. They're negotiating for recognition of their nuclear weapons, which is a completely different thing.
Exactly, and I think that's actually what's happened as a result of this process. Donald Trump has legitimated the North Korean regime. He has treated Kim Jong-un as an equal on the world stage. He's praised him to the skies, as the clips that you just played showed that. And he has essentially led to relaxation of sanctions on North Korea, because China is simply not enforcing sanctions in the same way they were before. And in fact, other countries just don't have any incentive to enforce those sanctions, because Trump says the problem is solved. So why would they want to, inflict pain on themselves if the problem has been solved? So I think Kim Jong-un is actually getting what he wants, which is keeping the nuclear program, seeing sanctions relaxed, and seeing his profile enhanced on the world stage. He's getting pretty much everything he wants. The U.S. is getting almost nothing out of this.
And General, I mean, you're getting not only what Max talked about, you're also getting a stop to joint military maneuvers with South Korea that the U.S. has had for quite some time. And the fact that the North Koreans have been discussing, according to the Post, how to deceive Washington about the number of warheads and missiles they have, I mean, why should anyone expect them to do any differently?
They shouldn't. And that's the key issue, Anderson. When you're talking about the military exercises, I think Mr. Trump got a lot of advice from his military leaders in the Defense Department is, let's do snapback exercises. If something wrong happens, let's immediately put them back into place and prove if you're going to say take them off the table, then at least be prepared to put them back. We did not do that. He has not taken the advice of anyone who is expert on many of these issues in North Korea, as he hasn't with many other parts of the world. So it's to be expected what we're seeing right now, and it's more than unfortunate. It's extremely dangerous and just catastrophic that this is going on.